Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honourable Minister for Finance and Corporate Affairs, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, who will be in conversation with R. Sukumar, Editor-in-Chief, Hindustan Times.
Okay, good morning, and it's good to see a full house on a Saturday morning, but we have, the most important person in the country right now as far as I'm concerned, right? The economy is on top of everyone's mind, and Mr. Sitharaman knows this better than anyone. When times are bad, everyone becomes an economist, right? So this room is full of economists. I've had lots of suggestions on what questions I should ask. But I want to start off by not looking back, but looking ahead, right? Because after all, the theme is conversations for a better tomorrow. The Prime Minister has articulated this intent of building India into a 5 trillion economy. So looking forward, what is your vision? What are the building blocks of this 5 trillion economy? If you could just tell us about that.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for having me here. My job in answering this question is made far easier because of the Prime Minister's speech yesterday here before you. I think he's elaborated on most of the things that this government has been voted in for in 2019. The vision has been expressed in very many different ways, but the 5 trillion is the one which gets repeatedly mentioned. But the vision is not really at the abstract macro level. It translates into several things, such as making sure everybody has a home, give a house to every Indian citizen, make sure that house has a toilet, make sure that house has electricity, and make sure that this country has healthier people, ensure that they have good health insurance, Ayushman Bharat, and so on. So everything which is normally macroeconomically stated as to what is your vision is also linked backward towards what exactly is it going to mean to an ordinary Indian. And in that skills and in that education and so on. But okay, you have said that, and how are you achieving that target? For that, of course, the Prime Minister himself does a Pragati program. We were just talking with Ms. Bhartiya as to what this Pragati is all about. The Prime Minister himself talks to the district level administrators to say, in your district, what are the kind of central schemes which are reaching, how efficient are they, and in achieving the goals, what other help would you need, and so on. So it's not waiting for an indirect monthly report or once in 2 months report. It's hands-on down to the grassroots level. Now, if it is so micromanaged, you would think, are we losing out on the larger games of better commitment to environment, ensuring we use safer and environment-friendly electricity and so on, energy consumption of the country? Even on that, the commitments which have been made globally are being fulfilled because of the ways in which we have renewed our investment for such sectors, and underplaying definitely on the fossil fuel-based thing. So the building blocks are home, energy, environment, making sure skills and skills-driven jobs and so on. So for which you would say today, probably the private investment is not happening, so how would you do it? We've made repeated commitments, and this is also being very clearly monitored by most of us in the ministries, is public expenditure. public expenditure in sectors which can immediately have a ripple effect in terms of jobs, in terms of local consumption, in terms of core sectors revival, infrastructure investment through public expenditure. That is going on in a very big way, and I think the amount was very clearly declared, 100 lakh crores for the next 5 years. And I am glad to tell you that the task force which is looking into this has already listed some of the big ticket expenditure which public sector has to undertake, public sector meaning government has to undertake in terms of infrastructure building. So I can go on like this. So the focus is the larger picture which may have abstract, philosophical, plus objectives which are stated as targets, and the building blocks towards it, and the way in which we're going to spend to ensure that happens. And if all this eventually can trigger private investment, it's going to be a greater synergy which will push the economy forward.
I think now that we have this vision laid out, when you come back to the current environment and the current situation, there's been a lot of concern about slowing growth. The fact that growth was 5% in the previous quarter, in 2 quarters back, and then last quarter it was 4.5%. At the conference to announce the 4.5% results, Finance Ministry officials said that they see a bottoming out and that things will get better from here on. Is that what you're seeing? Do you think that the economy has bottomed out and we are beginning to see a recovery, or do you think there's still some time to go before we start seeing a recovery?
I like to believe that, and I like to believe that that's true of some sectors in specific. But in some other sectors, maybe they would want some more help. So I don't want that to lead to me lead me to a state of lull. I'll certainly not get influenced by that. If it happens, so be it, and I'll be happy for it. But I think my attention will be only on making sure more is done towards greater stimulus. So if that message of it is bottomed out is coming through, good. But I'm not going to allow that to distract me.
I'm glad you spoke about the stimulus, because clearly, right, I mean, while there's been lots of argument about the nature of the slowdown and everything else, I don't want to go there, right, because then it ends up being an academic discussion. But what we are seeing on the ground is clearly that consumption is down, and investment, private investment especially, is also down. So there needs to be a demand push, and there also needs to be an investment push. And in Parliament, in your speech in the Rajya Sabha, you spoke about 32 measures that you would actually put in place to ensure that some of these things are addressed. Will there be more? Because especially after this 4.5% came out, there has been a significant demand from industry, from analysts, that right now the only way out seems to be a very strong fiscal push, very strong fiscal stimulus.
I like to tell myself, and also through you to the audience, that this 4.5 relates to the period July, August, September. And post-July, actually through September, August and September, we kept coming up with a lot of announcement about some interventions that we are taking. And concrete figures for what has happened in October and November through the public sector banks reaching out. And I don't want to underplay the role of the private banks also. They enthusiastically on their own joined this outreach which we had designed for the public sector banks. Nearly 5 lakh crores have been distributed, in the sense have been given following every prudential norms to those who want to take the credit and also do newer business, buy newer things, buy their homes and so on. So, and this has happened in 400 districts of the country, which means we are talking about money reaching directly for consumption purposes in those hinterland and not in metropolitan cities. So one step, one concrete step where I'm giving you the figures about how we have made sure money reaches people for consumption. The other way in which I can reach money for consumption is to send more money through direct benefit transfer into the accounts of those beneficiaries who should get it, farmers or MSMEs or people who are otherwise receiving government entitlements. That's also happening. In fact, the figures which I had given out, in the first 2 tranches of the farmers getting the PM Kisan, we had nearly 7.2 crore farmers who received it. The number has come down a bit, but we are also making sure they are all Aadhaar seeded so that it doesn't really go into ghost accounts. So there are ways in which, for giving stimulus, for consumption, we are adopting a direct method and also the method through which we are spending on infrastructure, whose spillover can go over to other core industries, labor, and so on.
Will there be more?
Will there be more?
Right.
If I say yes, it will be when. And if I say yes, it's also going to be back to me saying, are you not too close to the budget? So I don't want to say yes, although I'm wishing I can say. At the same time, I will not say no, because we are working on more.
Okay,
Does that help?
We can read your lips. One of the things that has been spoken of is a personal income tax rate cut, rationalization, whatever you will call it, to sort of put more money in the hands of people, because that could definitely boost consumption. Is that something you're thinking of?
One among the many things that we're thinking of.
And is it something on which we could see some action, perhaps not now, perhaps in the budget?
Then you'll have to wait for the budget.
What else can be done to boost demand? And I'm asking this because if you look at consumer confidence numbers and if you look at business confidence numbers, both are down. And I want to break this question up into 2 parts. What can be done to boost consumer confidence? Because that's clearly very low.
You know, that's the question which I ask everybody who I get to meeting wherever I've been in the last 3 months. It's one thing for the government to think, yes, we know what to do and keep doing that. But it's completely another if I've been told as to what are the kind of things which will help in boosting consumer confidence. So I do not for a minute want to believe I know it all. I do not for a minute want to think that what I've done is enough. I want to know that answer from all others, and that would only add to what we are doing. So that's a question which is, if you don't mind, Sukumar, not to be addressed to me.
Okay.
You should get the answers and give it to me.
On business confidence, leave aside consumer confidence, and this, clearly there is at one level an aversion to risk, which comes from many factors, right? And one factor is policy certainty. I mean, I know that our policies are evolving, but if you look at some sectors, for instance, there have been changes that have made without grandfathering previous investments. And then there are issues. I don't want to go into specifics, but just to make myself clear, if you look at Walmart and Flipkart and you look at what happened to them after they made the investment, and I think that's one. The other one is there is still, despite everything that your government has done on the tax side, there is still a fear of the taxman. Right? There is this, you could call it nervousness, you could call it anxiety, but it is very much there. And at a third level, your predecessor, the former finance minister, Mr. Jaitley, was here last year, and he actually mentioned this. He spoke about the adventurism of some of the central agencies. And that adventurism clearly hurts business in some ways because there is fear. So how do you address business confidence? How do you make businessmen feel it's all right, you can take risks? A bad business decision will not be treated as malfeasance or corruption or something else. So, and I think that distinction has stopped being made at so many levels. And it's not just you. I think, just to complete the loop, I think it's even the media, right? I mean, something goes wrong in a company, the first thing that media invariably ends up saying is to look at whether it is malfeasance, while it could just simply be a bad business decision.
Yes, absolutely. And you've packed so much in that one question. the effort to make taxmen understand that there were ways in which they could achieve the same end, in the sense obtain more credible information from a tax assessee, rather than appearing to breathe down their neck, or rather than appear to be pressurizing them, leaving them to feel that they are being harassed. And this effort had started even much before me, and particularly during my senior predecessor, who I respect immensely and whose absence I can't say how much I do feel, Sri Jaitley. And at his time itself, during his time itself, this effort to make taxmen understand that it is not necessary to harass had commenced. I am duly following it now, literally, physically also going over to the different circles and meeting with officials to say, even if you think that the targets which are given to you are something which you won't be able to achieve unless you're going to strain yourself, I'd rather you not strain and you not pressure tax assessees. And that has been happening more than one round, and I shall continue to do that. But not just physically going and appealing to them, but we've now moved that largely to technology. We've moved that largely to say assessees will now be questioned through the system. They can answer to the system, as it were, and if necessary, further questioning or further information requirement will be done on a faceless method. That's already commenced. And we have already received a lot of people who are saying, this is at least giving me some relief. I hope further prosecution and other things are also simplified like this. So we are going on that mode. If it started on the direct taxes, now we have already started extending it even to indirect, the GST related queries. And therefore, that is going to be one way in which we can get out of this fear, because now you'll be so impersonally handling it with only answers to be sent in some form or fashion, rather than have visitors come to your house and knock at your door. So we are removing that element. And even for cases which have been pending for a very long time, I have come up with a scheme that by December 31st, if you just tick some boxes in the inquiry that comes to you, we are willing to settle the cases and get you out of the court, get us out of the court. So that is also the second way. Third is, I think, to a large extent, I would appeal to the assessees that they should feel comfortable to directly approach my office or the Revenue Secretary's office, where we assure you that if you have a problem at the ground level and you're just not able to get out of the situation, without revealing your identity to concerned circles or officers, we shall make sure your problem is addressed. If this is the way in which we are looking at addressing the issue of harassment, in the long run, we want to make sure that the entire taxation structure is simplified. There are no ifs and buts in it, and ifs and buts are the ones on which subjective interpretation come in. So we want to make sure that ifs and buts are removed, exemptions are removed, and we proved our intentions when we came up with the corporate tax rate cut. We said no exemptions. You come straight, give us the least that you can for business's sake. And in that, we also made it sure we are not denying those who are in the exemptions regime. You continue to be there, and once you finish the credit for those exemptions, move on to this one, which has no exemptions to offer. So that will be the philosophy with which every tax is going to be now framed. So from now on, we are moving towards a greater simplified and exemption-free, therefore harassment-free, therefore subjective interpretation-free taxation regime.
Thank you. I know I sort of asked you too many questions together.
My answers are also not short.
The policy certainty bit. How do we ensure that when you're framing policies, especially in evolving areas, you don't affect an investment that's already been made? How do I? When you're evolving policy, when you're creating policy.
That's why you spoke of the grandfathering, didn't you?
That's right.
So, in fact, even in this, haven't we given enough option for grandfathering, whether it's your buyback of the shares that you had announced, whether it is the taxation relief that we're giving. Grandfathering is now everywhere making sure that we don't exclude or affect people who are already in a certain regime. So that'll certainly be the margin given to people who exist in a regime. We are not going to simplify it to that extent that we forget a whole lot of people who are already in some framework.
And that will be the norm, right, going forward?
Obviously.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned indirect taxes, GST, and I have a couple of questions on GST, and I'd like to start off by asking you, there's been, originally when GST was framed, the direction was always that it would be simplified over time, it would be rationalized over time, and depending on how revenues look, if they look good, that there could actually be a reduction in rates. And there was significant simplification both on the process side and in terms of rates and grouping of various products and everything else. But of late, there have been two issues that have come up. The first one is an issue that's been raised by the states, and they've raised it with you, which actually affects the federal compact between the center and the states, because the states are saying we have not been paid, and they've been told that there might be a little bit of a delay in that. So
have they been told that?
At least that's what they are suggesting, right? I don't know whether they've been told that, which I'm hoping you will tell us now.
Yeah, so the compensation is one. Will you ask me the other two later?
I will, once we finish this, yeah.
GST, I think, is a good law, and it is very required for a country as large as India. It is required also because we've had more than 50-60 years of looking at India as one market, but India as several markets. Each state becoming a market, each state having its own law on a certain, taxation on goods and services. So it was only right and timely that we got the GST Act. All right, even as we brought it in, there were a lot of pushes and pulls, which, of course, again, I'll go back to recalling that it was only the personality of Shri Arun Jaitley, backed by the Prime Minister, which could bring all states together to have a consensus and agree to what could be the first version of a GST. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been possible, considering even then the pressure was on the government saying, you can't even get a GST through. Repeatedly questions were being asked. And I think at that time, due to this kind of a very taking everybody on board approach, it was possible. At that time, states had applied their mind. I'll be fair to everybody. Every state had applied their mind to say existing VAT regime, existing excise regime, and therefore with a revenue neutral mindset, what could be the taxation band to which a certain set of commodities could come in. All this was in detail discussed over several meetings of the empowered committee which existed before the GST Council. The GST Council consists of all the finance ministers. It was all agreed, and a certain framework was given which was acceptable to everybody. Now post that, and I'm not blaming anyone here, equally all of us went about in every meeting of the GST Council reducing the taxation rate of certain set of commodities, another set of commodities later, a third meeting, a third set of So end of the day, the intentions were good. You kept reducing. Now, reduction per se is not bad, but the GST structure is such that when you have a certain rate and you have also the input tax credit being passed, just to put it simply, I buy some raw material, I pay tax for it. With that raw material, I produce something else, I pass that on to the buyer. But when I pass that on to the buyer, for the tax that I paid, I reduce a certain sum and only carry forward that excess of tax to the next buyer from me. So that input tax credit each time is loaded onto the tax that you would pay and set off to that extent, and it goes. Now, if because you're looking at wanting to reduce the tax on certain number of items, you kept reducing, reaching a stage where the credit was no longer a credit. Credit was minuscule. Because you reduce the item of the tax on the raw material, the offset therefore was lesser, you ended up transferring more taxes to the buyer because the credits were lesser here. End of the day, now you have a new set of people saying, why are you taxing us more? It wasn't like this before. We are not taxing them more, but this reduction here on some items has ended up passing the burden on to the final one, which was otherwise earlier taken care of. So I'm not saying people did this thoughtlessly, but in an enthusiasm to reduce more taxes, that framework which was originally agreed at stage 1 of the GST has got distorted. As a result, you suddenly feel, oh my God, it is much worse than what happened in stage 1 of GST. That was after a lot of consideration of how much eventually will go to the consumer, because it's a consumer consumption end tax. So those distortions have crept in. Now in the meanwhile, you're also looking at wanting to get more information so that there is no discrepancy between one and the other, one state and the other state, because after all, goods are moving from one state to another state. This meant that more information in the form of filing forms also got in. People thought when you're bringing in technology, it'll be a couple of keystrokes and finish. I've filed my return. Yes, that should be the end goal. But if you're also wanting to gather more information because you want to pass the benefits here and there, and you kept enthusiastically asking the assessee to give one more information each time, the tax per se is getting complicated because of this unstructured bringing down of rates. Another, it's also getting complicated because you want to be sure that you're doing everything correct, but ending up asking for so much more information in a technology-driven system. People just get fed up of wanting to give so much information. So we have problems in both the hands. That is where it's got into a stage where today, gladly I must say, all over the country, we've asked anyone who wants to talk on the simplification of filing processes to please go tell the officers. If you're physically not going, please through email or through some addresses that we've given, let us know through some kind of a digital way what you want to do to simplify the forms. Rate structures are GST Council's business, I'll take it to them. Eventually, we'll of course have to rationalize. Do we want so many slabs? Do we want to have just 2 or 3 slabs? Original intent was that we'll have just the 3. Merit, sin, and the standard. Just the 3 rates. Today what has happened is, in a sense you have 3 rates, but you're having too many complications. So we are addressing that. I can only give a confidence to the audience here and through you to many others that we shall have a very good streamlined GST and address the issues for the assessees.
But what about the...
Sorry about the long answer.
Yeah, no, but what about the payment to the states? Because...
A 14%, and that will get compounded every year, compensation was assured for the states, which we are honoring, which we shall honor, which we shall continue to honor. And that compensation was going to be through the collection of a certain cess, GST cess. The cess would be collected, and clearly from the cess collected, states will be given the compensation 14%. Unfortunately, in the last collections, the cess component has been not so adequate to compensate the states per 14%. So, if we've reached a stage now where the collection was inadequate to give, this is an open fact, because anyone can go into the GST collections and everything else and see it. So, obviously, the compensation has not gone through to the states. That's not to take it to the level of saying, oh, that compact has been broken. Oh, no. The cess fund, if it's there, I'm going to give it. It's not there, but we are also making clear to ourselves as to how we can do it. We are not talking about even touching the compact. We have to honor the compact. So let there not be any doubt about what's happening to the compact. Oh no, we shall honor it. But the reality is this. So I just want to put that in, and states, some of the finance ministers came and met me, I've heard them out, and what they're raising as an issue is absolutely genuine. There's no question about its genuineness.
All right. On GST, and I know this is a council decision, it's not, you're not going to take it unilaterally. Is there also going to be a rethink to take up some of the rates because collections are low?
Well, as you said, yes, it is the GST's call, council's call.
But directionally, is that something you would consider, which you would think of doing?
I may not be able to preempt the council on this by saying anything now.
All right. One of the things that's become very clear over the last 2 years and more so over the last 6 months is that we are very, very focused on the deficit. Right? And there is a school of thought that says maybe for 12 to 18 months we should not look at the deficit because that would actually help the government to go out and provide the kind of fiscal stimulus that is needed. And then after 18 months, 12 months or 18 months, you bring back the discipline when growth is back on track. Why would you not do that?
You're again putting me into a situation where I have to state things which I'd rather reserve to say in the budget. Why would I not do that? Technically, nothing stops me not do that. But am I going to do that? I can't say now.
But is it something you're opposed to?
No, not in principle. I mean, fiscal discipline, of course, is a law. I have to go by the FRBM Act. I have to obey the Act. So I have to go by the glide path which has been given to me from 2014, if not even from 2004. The glide path has been given from 2004 after the passing of that Act in 2003 or something. So I'll have to confine myself to that glide path even if it is strictly difficult. But that is a law and therefore I have to obey it, is one story. The other is the view of the learned economists who are all telling us now is the situation where you may want to pause on that fiscal discipline angle and see how you can, have some forbearance, move towards funding and giving the stimulus, and therefore possibly bypass the FRBM, are all being discussed. May not be the time appropriate for me to comment whether I'll do this way or that way.
No, because see, one of the things, and we've often talked about how everyone gets caught up in definitions about something is cyclical or structural when it comes to the slowdown. And there is this school of thought that we have now moved on to an economic situation which is very different and probably calls for fairly radical ideas. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack, especially from people like Ajit who's sitting here. But there are some economists who actually suggest things like helicopter money, right? I mean, they're saying things are bad. Government should work closely with central banks at one level. Helicopter money is not such a bad idea. But we seem to be, at least from where I sit, we seem to be averse to doing things like that because I think we're still playing by the book in some ways.
I'm glad to hear this comment because there's a sort of margin given that you don't need to play by the book. It's nice coming from a journalist. And if it hadn't come from the journalist and if it had come from me, I would have at least 10 other journalists telling me, the minister is so careless, she's so laid back, she's not even going by the book. So I don't mind, I'm not faulting Sukumar, but I'm also not sure if this is the best place for me to say whether I would go by the book or not.
All right. Of all the sectors, and this is, again, it's not new, you've known this. Over the last year, the two sectors that have seen the most pain, One is real estate, which is not just last year, but for a fairly long. India has been in a very, very bad shape when it comes to the construction and real estate business for some time now. And the other one is the NBFC sector, where there was a problem with the island affairs, and everyone thought that that was it, but then it emerges that that's not it, and there is a deeper problem. And there are still fears, especially in Mumbai, that what we've seen is just the tip of the iceberg, and there is a huge mess. I know that in your budget, you announced a one-time window to sort this out for NBFCs, but it was a limited window. Do you think you sort of need an unlimited window, or let's say a bigger war chest of money to sort this out?
See, post the budget, I've had quite a few sessions with the NBFCs. And when I say NBFCs, I know there are thousands of them in this country, but maybe the top 5 to 10 are the ones who are dealing with a vast section of the funding through the NBFCs. However, even for those who are below those 5, below top 10, top 20, I've had varying stages of meetings. Now, one thing it is for the RBI as the supervisory and regulatory body to constantly monitor the health of many of these NBFCs without really becoming too intrusive. So they are monitoring, and I'm closely in touch with the RBI as regards the NBFCs. My one-liner, even if it sounds a bit pedestrian, is I don't want anyone falling off the cliff. So that is the extent to which RBI and the Ministry of Finance are watching them, but at the same time not getting in their way from doing their regular business. Now, with this said, I'm also making sure that funds reach NBFC. Now, if we can just understand this problem, over last 15, 20 years, if I can put it that way, roughly, public sector banks and scheduled banks, commercial banks, were supposed to carry on with their core business of lending, keeping savings, and for short and medium term. But the long-term finance for particularly infrastructure kind of activities were to be done by a development bank, which was what IDBI was, and we know the story of IDBI. Strictly speaking, public sector banks do not have the expertise or capability for long-term, different kind of risk involved infrastructure lending. But many of them did exactly that. And then NBFCs were carrying forward with what was essentially the banking, commercial bank's job, lend for short and medium term, but then they also started lending a bit longer and with short-term funds. So you ended up in both the places with asset liability mismatch. As a result, when banks had NPA, they didn't want to venture any further into lending. They moved it on to the NBFCs. NBFCs went on a spree of lending. If you see, there is a real connect between all these. And once the banks got very wary of lending, and I am glad the Prime Minister said, we shall not inquire into bona fide commercial decisions. Even if it results in commercial failure, we shall not go on a fishing expedition putting everybody under inquiry. And that is what we are now going back to. Infuse equity into banks, give them money. They can go on getting the monies from all those defaulters back sometime, but give them money to carry on with their regular business. Give NBFCs monies, and not just the top 5, even those who are below it. Not just the 5 to 25, but even those who are below it, for which I've had meetings with the banks to ensure that they're not just looking at AAA rated assets, but they can look at even assets slightly at the investment quality level, for which the government has announced this, partial guarantee. Today, in fact, in the newspapers, you would have seen that the first closures happened in the first tranche of partial guarantee that we want to give these NBFCs. So we are attending to NBFCs. I wish the doubts in the minds of people after ILFS is removed. Both the regulator and the government are making sure liquidity reaches them. We only want people to go demand the credit that they need to carry on with their business, and private sector should now take this opportunity to get to these institutions and take the money you need to start your business all over again.
The other sector, of course, is real estate, and there you announced a fund for incomplete
right.
projects, which you then subsequently expanded from 10,000 crore to 25,000 crore. And I think the first projects are going to...
Absolutely. In fact, we had, even as we announced the last mile connectivity money to be given by an alternative investment mechanism that we brought in, there were more than 150 projects which approached. They've all been vetted for what they are. They've all been vetted for how much they would need. They've all been vetted to ensure that the RERA compliance and everything else is in right place. And by 15th of December, which is actually T plus 40th day, T is the time that I announced, to the 40th day, monies will go into the escrow account towards completing these projects. We start with 5, we start with 10, we go on, and hopefully by February, and this is not just in Delhi and Mumbai, we've got lists from Hyderabad, we've got lists from Bengaluru, Guwahati, Patna, so all over the country, incomplete projects are all coming. So I want to assure the home buyers who've been left in the lurch for a very long time, who've taken EMIs, who've borrowed from the banks, who are also giving their rents. We are fully seized of your problem, and that is where this has come through. You are getting the results for your long pending demands.
You know, I really think you should say something about income tax, because 60% of these questions are about a tax cut, right? One of the things one has noticed about the Indian economy, if you look at the numbers over a significant period of time, is the years when agriculture does well, economic growth is good, because it forms that foundation on the basis of it does. And then you have growth drivers which sort of propel the economy. Through the 2000s, for instance, the mid-2000s, when India grew very fast, a lot of it came from exports. And we are having problems in both areas now, right? I mean, what exactly do you think we can do to drive exports? What do you think we can do to bring agriculture up to scratch?
There's a lot of work going on in encouraging agriculture towards like what it was before, to have greater exports, for farmers to get better prices, and to ensure that the strengths that we had in oil seeds, the strengths that we had in coarse grains are brought back. So it is being done through various different ways. But the most critical is agriculture has suffered, and this is something which is not so glamorous when you talk about agriculture, has suffered for want of adequate infrastructure. It's not just connecting that last village to the market, but it's also trying to get the right kind of storage for the various agricultural products. Some don't need air conditioning, some need air conditioning, but some need dehumidifiers, some others need just pest control. So the various types of storage facilities, depending on where what is required, rather than blindly going and giving silos everywhere, is one approach which the Prime Minister is guiding it himself. And I've been a witness to many such meetings where agriculture and the storage matters have been taken up. The second, of course, is a question of value addition to the agriculture products. Now, when you talk of oil seeds, we need a large quantity of edible oil. But post that, the oil meal cakes have a great market outside. And China, for instance, has been steady in demanding our oil meal cakes. If only we can focus on that and think in terms of those traditional oil seeds that we've been growing, and again for which this government has announced MSP and made sure that we get adequate oil seeds. Now, for them, the processes are not just the, oil extracting units, but also a question of processing and packing to a certain standard and exporting the oil cakes. So there is a very clear, a large canvas in which not just the procurement for the farmer, but reaching to the market, and this whole debate in this country, I wish and I appeal, if the media can look at it from the point of view of every time there's a spike in the price of any commodity, does that help the farmer? Or are we every time debating only because today when the prices go up, we are worried about the urban consumer? Yes, we have to be worried about them too. But does that price advantage get to the farmer? And when the prices come down, do we talk about, oh consumer, you're getting it now at a low price, but how do we help the farmer now to get a better price than this low price which you pay? So the debate should be, ideally, the opposite of what it is now. Prices have gone up. Oh my God, the consumer's struggling. Yes, he's struggling. We'll have to help them. But does that price help the farmer? That should be the debate.
Correct.
And the other way around, when it comes down, yes, the consumer benefits. Yes, it should be talked about. It should be good. But then how do we help the farmer without bringing market distortions? So the debates are all now not helping us, not helping not just the government, any one of us.
Okay, we are almost out of time, and I have two more questions that I want to ask you. The first one is about data. There has been a lot of skepticism about data that is coming out from the government in some quarters. The fact that, for instance, the consumption report that was recently leaked in some media and then scrapped, and then the government said it would work again, doesn't reassure people that the data is sacrosanct and the data can be taken as authoritative and respected and is credible. What are your thoughts on this?
There's no doubt we need to bring credibility back to the data. We need to assure people who need the data, and lots of people need the data, even government needs its own data. But the fact is, sometimes when genuinely something has gone wrong in the ground and therefore the survey results are being held back, it's not to cast aspersion on every such data which is being collected by the government. So that I think we should keep in mind. Overall, I think the government is fairly seized of the debate which is going on data and its credibility. The intention is to make sure that any kind of inappropriate methodology which is common into the data will have to be addressed. But that is not to deny data as something which all of us do take as a position. So we'll have to work towards better credibility. We have to work towards making available data without any obstruction.
Couple of people have asked this question, and I think it's a good question. Personally, you've received a lot of criticism, and much of it has also been targeted at you directly. How have you dealt with this?
I don't allow it to worry me. I'm not inhuman. I sometimes do get affected by it, but I suppose it's part of the job, so I can't really wish it away. Let it come. Let it keep coming. I'll handle it.
All right. Let it come is a good note to end the session on, right? Thank you very much, Finance Minister.